Hey Divas, this is SUPERZOMGBBQ and today we're going to be speaking about the Divas. The Divas, the best to the worst in the tier, and we're going to go from the bottom to the top to talk about those Divas. And there's definitely some people who've been very lucky, pulled themselves some Pro Divas already in the SummerSlam tier. Let me know if you're one of those lucky people in the comment section below so everyone can thumbs down your comment. I'm joking. But seriously, if you pulled a Diva in SummerSlam tier, be happy because it does not come easy. What we're going to do is talk about the SummerSlam tier, and we're going to talk about those Divas and get them ranked from worst to best, and also talk about some of the worst and best stats in the tier. So what we're going to do first of all is talk about the worst card in the tier. Unfortunately, I have to tell you this, if you've pulled it, is Donna Brooke. Now, just before I talk about Donna Brooke, the worst card in the tier it's a bit of a strong saying because it's down to stats specifically. Technically, you could win with that card. You could easily win with that card. In fact, you could kill other cards quite easily with the worst card in the tier if you've got the right tokening and if you've pro'd it before anyone else has. The fact of the matter is that these cards overall stat-wise are the worst cards in the tier because their overall stats, powers, toughness, speed and charisma, are lower or way lower than other cards which are available to obtain. So it's not saying that your cards are awful, it's saying that maybe they're not as good as the ones you could put in the future. Just to clarify. At the end of the day, what this doesn't take into consideration is tags. For example, in WrestleMania tier, the best left arrow tag was a Brie Bella, who was 5th or 6th available in terms of the best stats in the tier because she wasn't particularly highly leveled. Whereas the best right arrow was the best in the tier, which was Nikki Bella, who killed pretty much every other card that was available. But to get a tag, you had to use the 1st and the 5th to 6th best at the same time. It wasn't usual to have that kind of issue, whereas if you wanted two of the best up arrow and down arrow, use Charlotte and Lita in WrestleMania tier. Whereas in this tier, obviously it's a very different situation, and we're talking about that in a moment. But back to Donna Brooke. Donna Brooke unfortunately does share the benefit, or the not so benefit, of having two of the worst stats in the tier. And basically power, toughness, speed and charisma, she has got some pretty god-awful stats, and even if you go up to the 3rd card above her, she gets 4-statted by that card. So if you pulled her, it's not such a great deal. If you got a pro of her early, then that's great. Otherwise, sorry. The next one to talk about is Emma. Emma has some decent stats. She's okay. She's the only other card in the tier that procs or does the ability in toughness and charisma, so she does have her uses there. Unfortunately, the other card that she comes up against, Sasha Banks, she does pale in comparison to, but a good amount of charisma on, and Emma could actually see her win against some of the others, and leveling her up in toughness as well as charisma could actually see her beat two of the cards that are actually above her in free stats. Actually, 3 of the cards are above her in free stats, so she is very useful if used properly. Kind of reminds me of Goldust in WrestleMania tier. One of the worst cards available, but in toughness and charisma, you leveled that card up right, it pretty much killed some of the mid-tier cards as well, which is really crazy. But let's move on to Nia Jax. Now, Nia Jax has actually a good level of power, okay level of toughness. Otherwise, it's nice to see her go up because now she's on the main roster of Raw, but her stats are still quite and I personally believe that she should be above these and level with Natalia, who's around mid-tier, which we'll talk about in a second. But Carmella is the next one. I don't really get this. I would have personally said Carmella would have been the worst one in the tier, not because of ability, but because Donna Brooke's done way more than she has, Emma's done way more than she has, but Carmella is the 8th best diva out of the 11 that are available in WWE SuperCard at the moment. How you doing? Alexa Bliss. Alexa Bliss is the next one, 7th in the list, tied with Natalia of all cards. Now, Alexa Bliss, she's got one of the best speed stats in the tier. She's also got a decent amount of charisma. Otherwise, her card stats are they're okay. They're alright. They're not anything to shout home about, but if you got a pro of her, then it's all good. Natalia, very different situation because she's the only card available that I'm aware of that procs in power and charisma. So Natalia in the past has actually been really useful in Season 1 and Season 2. Has been one of the only cards that procs in either, well, back in Season 1, power and toughness. And in Season 2, power and charisma, I believe she's the only one in this tier actually that does. So she could be really, really useful, especially given that there's no one else who does. But now we've got halfway throughout this, so let's just clarify. Donna Brooke, Emma, Nia Jax, Carmella, Alexa Bliss, and then you got Natalia that heads off the bottom half of that list. What we're now going to talk about is some of the worst stats in the tier, and then talk about the best stats and move on to the best divas available. So let's get that done. So the worst stats available in the tier are the cards I've just mentioned. Worst power goes to Carmella. She's got just a horrendous amount of power. Whereas toughness goes to Alexa Bliss, the card I just mentioned. Now, she's actually okay in anything else. Donna Brooke, as I mentioned earlier on, does unfortunately share the worst speed and charisma. Kind of similar to one of the Diva cards in WrestleMania tier. I can't quite put my hand on it, but one of them did actually share the worst stats in 2 stats then as well. But Donna Brooke, unfortunately, is the worst card in the tier. And you can see it quite clearly because she's got the worst speed and charisma. Now, moving on to the best stats, these, again, by saying the word best, it's purely, not necessarily put down to opinion, but factual information based on stats. Even though Natalia's got one of the kind of average cards in the tier, she could be really useful because she's the only one that procs in power and charisma. So just bear that in mind when you're listening and watching this video, just to clarify that. Next thing to look at, best stats in the tier. There's actually one card that rules everyone else, very similar to the WrestleMania tier, and that is Charlotte. But talking more about Charlotte later. Female power, female toughness, both belong to Charlotte. She absolutely kills it in both stats. Then speed goes to Becky Lynch, and charisma goes to Sasha Banks. And it is nice to see a good representation of the 4 horsewomen. And I don't believe it's going to be that long after what happened at NXT TakeOver before Bayley joins that list and they make the 4 best divas in the tier. I do fear for Becky Lynch though, because I think she may get left behind with all this, even though she's probably one of the best performers out of the 4. The one thing that having some of these best stats actually allows you to do when you're tokening, just as a little bit of a hint and a tip that I've actually benefited from in the past, is actually using those best stats to your advantage and maybe using them to beat some of the lower tier cards, but then using other areas to strengthen in power. For example, with Sasha Banks, I always level Sasha Banks highly in toughness and leave the charisma a little bit, and then level up in speed and power to kind of get the best out of her for other superstars. For example, in this tier, I could level up my Sasha in toughness, speed, and charisma, and know that I would pretty much murder any other Charlotte that was available in the game. So that's just a tip from me, just to say, yes, they look like they've got the best stats, but when you've done overall tokening, potentially you could actually benefit more from leveling up cards like Sasha Banks in other stats. But it's worth giving it a try out, because sometimes it can really give you some benefits. But moving on from there, we're going to go to the best divas in the tier. Now, the best divas in the tier, again, talking about the overall stat-wise, we are dealing with cards that maybe who are some of the best overall stat, or just simply crush any of the other cards that are available. We're going to start from Natalia, where we finished off last time, and go straight to Bayley, who has one of the best speed stats in the tier, and one of the best charisma stats as well. Unfortunately, her power and toughness there are down massively. Whereas Asuka, which is really strange that Asuka is this high up, given that she was so low down last time, being the NXT Divas champion, and cards like Nia Jax, for example, haven't come up that far. I personally would have put Bayley above that, but it's nice to have another power card. She's second best in power as well, and she's the 5th best card in the tier overall. Unfortunately, she does get crushed by her next best card, which is Paige. Paige is one of the better cards, whereas in WrestleMania tier she was kind of iffy. Paige's actually got a decent card that does do quite well, but I think that's actually because of the lack of the Bella twins, because Nikki and Brie being retired, and Nikki obviously having time off for surgery. We could expect to see those cards maybe later on in, for example, fusions or throwbacks as an example, but we'll have to wait and see. But a card is very good and very, very useful, especially in, for example, toughness and maybe speed and charisma, to fight some of those power cards as well and beat those in free stats. So now we're down to the top 3. Top 3 best divas in the tier. First of all, belong to Becky Lynch. Now, Becky Lynch has one of the best overall charisma stats, one of the best overall speed stats. As I mentioned earlier on, she is the best in speed in the tier. And she's got some decent power and toughness as well, which is where she comes above cards, for example, like Bayley and Alexa Bliss as an example. Although, strangely, Alexa Bliss actually beats Becky in power, but whatever. Fact of the matter is Becky's the third best in a tier. And while she loses to Sasha in free stats, she does actually provide quite a nice tag team to Charlotte, which is I was saying earlier on about those combinable cards. Becky Lynch probably, despite Sasha being better, is one of the better cards to have, because if you guys to get yourself a Charlotte, you've got the best tag in the tier, full stop. Next one, Sasha Banks is second. She does have two of the best stats in the tier, and despite being free statted by the Charlotte, which I think is crazy, but then again, Charlotte is ridiculously OP in this tier. It is going to be interesting to see how many people put speed tokens on Sasha instead of Charlotte. But overall, Sasha Banks is the second best card in the tier. Moving on from that, we obviously do have, as I mentioned, kind of spoiled it, Charlotte's the best card in the tier. She's very similar to Nikki Bella in WrestleMania tier because she has two of the best stats, full stop, available in the tier, which are power and toughness. Not only that, she also beats a few cards in speed, and she's got quite a lot of charisma. And if I give you an example, she actually 4 stats Paige, which is quite dominating. So if your freebie or your most recent King of the Ring award was these, or you've managed to get one from an exhibition pool, maybe you've been lucky enough to get a Pro Diva as well, which is very, very difficult in any tier, let me know in the comment section below. That'll be it from me. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like this video and subscribe. Let me know what you think of these cards and which one you personally think is the best, whether it's just your opinion or because overall stats or the arrows. As I said, Becky Lynch potentially one of the most usable divas, even though Sasha Banks is better. Description below for my top 5 best superstars and worst superstars, and also details of Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and also Discord. Just to clarify, small disclaimer at the end of the video, I'm totally aware they are not divas and they are female superstars, but in the game they are classed as divas still. Whether that'll change for season 3, who knows at this point. I'll see you soon, and one last thing we forgot, and that is to sleep!